yesterday we left off talking about how a lot of times fossils are dated by measuring radioactive isotopes within the fossil itself. And so another way that that geologists also try to find the date of a fossil would be through the magnetism of a rock. So like during the formation of volcanic and sedimentary rock, iron particles in the rock align themselves with Earth's magnetic field. And so when these rocks harden, the orientation of these particles in time, they're frozen. And so throughout history, many times, the magnetism of like the North and the South Pole have reversed. And so when this happens, this affects all the particles, like all over the world. And so this reversal in one location can give us like a time frame as to what time period that these rocks may be in. But this really isn't, I mean, this approach lets us date the rocks, but it's really not the best approach. A lot of the time it's really just used to confirm the age of the fossils. And so then the origin of new groups of organisms. So fossils, what they do is they let us look at where groups come from compared to where they are today. And so these fossils are really central for us to look at the different advancements that each organism has made over time. And it also tells us how long it takes for an organism to achieve like a new set of characteristics. And so an example of this would really be how amphibians, reptiles, and mammals all belong to a group of tetrapods, which means that we have 4 limbs. And so mammals are unique from this now in days because, for like a good example would be our jaws, our lower and upper jaws are different, and our really highly differentiated teeth. So we have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. And so they show that this unique set, the unique jaw that we have and the unique set of teeth that we have is part of a series of gradual modifications that happen over a long period of time. And if we were to place if we had fossils of every single time period, if we were to place them next to each other, it would be like a smooth continuum to show where we got these traits today. And just to show you, so this would just be a picture to describe like how mammals were evolving over time, and you can see how the teeth all of a sudden go from being the same kind to being all different kinds, and how the jaw kind of condenses. And if you look over here, it's telling you that from early tetrapods like reptiles, including like dinosaurs and birds, like they did develop, but obviously they're very different from us today, but we still all come from the same place. And so through this process here, you end up getting your mammal from today and age.
So in the next section, it talks about key events in life's history. So an important thing to know about is the geological record, which is a standard time scale that divides Earth's history into 4 eons: the Hadean, Archean, and the Proterozoic, that together lasted about 4 billion years. And the last half billion years is called the Phanerozoic eon, and that encompasses most of the animals when they existed on Earth. Okay, so the Phanerozoic eon is divided into 3 eras, which is the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. And each era represents a distinct age in history. So for example, the Mesozoic was called the age of the reptiles. This is because there are a lot of reptilian type animals, including like dinosaurs, that were on Earth. The boundary between the eras corresponds to major extinction events. So when looking at the geological record, scientists can tell what age it is depending on when those major extinction events occurred. So one question I have is, how can geologists tell where there was a major extinction event? Does anyone know? Have any ideas? Sam?
When they find when they're digging or whatever, and they find a certain layer with a lot of fossils, maybe.
Yeah, it's the book said that in the fossils that they find, they can see the disappearance of some organisms, and then the replacement of those organisms by forms that evolved from the survivors. And so here's a diagram. So it kind of goes through the different periods of Earth's history. So, and then it's got like charts, like little lines that you can follow of when each organism started to develop. So like the purple line here is prokaryotes. So you can see that starting in the Hadean period, that's when prokaryotes formed, and then you see the blue line, which is eukaryotes. So you can kind of track when different organisms like came into being. So the first single-celled organisms. The earliest direct evidence of life dates back to 3.5 billion years ago, and it came from fossilized stromatolites. And these are layered rocks that formed when certain prokaryotes bind in thin films of sediment together. Today, these are found in shallow marine bays. And then photosynthesis and oxygen. Most oxygen in the air is from biological origins. So then, where does all this oxygen come from? Does anyone know where all the oxygen in our air comes from? Like we talked about it in one of our units before.
I should remember the part of photosynthesis.
Jack, do you know?
Part of photosynthesis.
Yeah, where does the oxygen form?
Isn't it part of photosystem one?
No, not photosystem one.
Or two, I mean.
Okay, where at in photosystem two?
Doesn't it break apart the H2O molecules and then it releases one, like it has a 1/2 O2, right?
Yes,
Yep, it's in the water splitting step of photosynthesis.
which is at the very, very, very beginning of photosynthesis, to reclaim the electrons lost
Is that photosystem two?
in photosystem two.
So that's how we get all the oxygen, like in our atmosphere, is that it's through photosynthesis, and as we went through the water splitting step. So when oxygenic photosynthesis first evolved, the free O2 produced probably dissolved into the surrounding water until it was in high enough concentration to react with elements dissolved in that water. So this included particles like iron. And this would cause formation of iron oxide, which would accumulate into the sediment. These sediments were then compressed into banded iron formations, and once all the iron precipitated, additional O2 dissolved into the water until seas and lakes became saturated with the O2. Finally, because the water was so saturated, gas began to gas out of the water, and that's when O2 started to enter the atmosphere. So O2 continued to steadily increase in the atmosphere until 2.4 billion years ago, and then it shot up. And this rise in O2 concentration doomed many prokaryotic groups. This was because many were anaerobic and they couldn't survive in the increasingly oxygenated environment. So while some managed to survive in anaerobic environments, so they found some places where there were still lower levels of O2, and others could adapt. So what was one type of adaptation, do you think? Knowing that these organisms were anaerobic at the beginning of time. Sam, you know?
Wait, can you repeat the question?
So if all these prokaryotes started out as anaerobic, how do you think that they were able to adapt and survive in an oxygenated environment? Yes, Sam?
Oh, I was gonna say they kind of like started to develop ways to breathe in oxygen.
Yeah, basically, they developed cellular respiration that involved oxygen. So when we talked about cellular respiration, we had the anaerobic path and then the aerobic path. So, I mean, they adapted to use the oxygen in order to
Yeah, as a final electron acceptor, so that they could engage in the electron transport mechanism using oxygen to carry those electrons away.
So the first eukaryotes, the oldest widely accepted eukaryotic fossils are from 1.8 billion years ago, and these eukaryotic cells probably developed from prokaryotes by endosymbiosis. So we've kind of talked about this before. Endosymbiosis is when a prokaryotic cell is engulfed by another cell. Eventually, it's a eukaryotic cell, but kind of getting to that. So small prokaryotes began to live inside larger cells. This could have occurred because it would be beneficial to both cells. So for example, if the host was anaerobic, having a cell that could make use of the increasing atmospheric O2 would be beneficial for the larger cell, and then they could live in a mutually beneficial relationship. Over time, the two cells became one, and they became inseparable, and thus giving eukaryotic cells mitochondria and plastids. So all eukaryotes have mitochondria, but not all of them have plastids, and this suggests serial endosymbiosis, which says that the mitochondria evolved first before the plastids through a sequence of endosymbiosis events. So it started out that the first endosymbiosis occurred with the mitochondria, and then later, as eukaryotes kept developing, then plastids went through endosymbiosis again, and that's how they got incorporated into some eukaryotic cells. So the endosymbiosis theory evidence. The inner membrane of both organelles have enzymes and transport systems similar to plasma membranes of prokaryotes. The mitochondria and plastids replicate by splitting, which is the same for how some prokaryotes replicate. Circular DNA not associated with histones or large amounts of other proteins are found in those plastids or mitochondria. And they have cellular machinery such as ribosomes, and that are most similar to prokaryotes as opposed to the eukaryotic host cell. So the earliest multicellular eukaryotes were red algae, and they're the oldest evidence of multicellular eukaryotes. And the first large multicellular organisms were called Ediacarna biota, and these were soft body organisms, including both algae and animals.